Hello and welcome to Heartbeats. This week, William has a fascinating interview with Sean Corcoran of Men for Life, and I'll bring you a roundup of news from home and abroad, and Peter will give us his viewpoint on the threats to freedom of conscience from the assisted dying bill.
Abortion is the product of failed masculinity. This is the belief of Men for Life, a US-based pro-life organisation focused on the inclusion of men in discussions relating to abortion. I'll be speaking to the CEO of Men for Life, Sean Corcoran, about his own journey from grief to grace and about the work of the organisation. Ultimately, we'll be looking to identify exactly what it is men can do to help end abortion. Sean, thank you very much for joining us. Now, Sean, you're the CEO of Men for Life, a pro-life organisation focused on the inclusion of men in human rights discussions, particularly with reference to abortion. What are some of the aims of Men for Life, and have you seen much success so far?
Yes, thank you for having me, William. So Men for Life is a pro-life organization. We are considered a consistently pro-life organization, which has some meaning behind it. It means basically pro-life from the womb to the tomb, right? From conception until natural death. But our main focus is on the pro-life movement as it pertains to abortion and to protecting the unborn. And so what we're doing right now is we are working with pregnancy centers to create a fatherhood program to be implemented by pregnancy centers. So there's 3,000 pregnancy centers, just to use a round number, in the United States. And if we can reach 50 men a year with this fatherhood program, that's 150,000 men a year, right? So what they have found is, through numbers I received from the Vitae Foundation, a research organization, pro-life studies, is that 97% of men who see an ultrasound and complete a fatherhood program choose life. And so the pregnancy centers have just like dug their teeth and sunk their teeth into this, and they're getting the dad to come in by telling mom, hey, bring dad. And so in many cases where there's not a situation of abuse or something like that, but in many cases, mom is bringing dad. And so he's seeing that ultrasound on that first day. So then to get that 97%, what we need to do is have a fatherhood program that really gets to the heart of what does he want, right? You know, in a 19, 20, 21-year-old man who may or may not be in a stable relationship with mom, you know, trying to entice him with the idea of, hey, come back and we'll teach you how to change diapers on a doll for a baby that you're not going to have for 4 months, 5 months, 8 months, you know, isn't something that young man really is going to want. You know, at some point he's going to see the importance of this, but we want to get him back now. We want to encourage him to be, we want to inspire him. So our program is based on inspiring this young man to authentic masculinity. And I think that gets to some of the other questions you have, but inspiring him to authentic masculinity, to a message that he's not heard before because maybe he didn't have a dad or a male role model, or maybe he had a bad dad or an abusive dad and he just doesn't want to be like him. And so giving him that mentor in the pregnancy center that lets him know that, hey, you can be more than what you've been told you can be, and we can show you how. You know, get him something he wants. So that's what we're really excited about right now, and that's what we're working on, to really try to reach as many men as possible. On the other side of that, reaching men just with the messaging, getting men involved, because people email me all the time and say, hey, how do I get involved? And I want to be active. How do I get involved? You know, we're talking with, I met with Students for Life last week, kind of talk about how we can work with them to get more men involved on campus, in the universities and the high schools. And we're working, I don't know if you're familiar with the NIL deals that they have for college athletes in America. It's where now, like as of last year, maybe the year before, a couple of years ago, college athletes are allowed to make money off of their name, image, and likeness. So that's where the NIL comes from. And so we had the idea with an attorney friend of mine who is an agent, a sports agent, to reach college athletes and see if they would do a deal with us where they would do social media. They would wear our Men for Life shirts, things like that. Because, the other young men on campus look up to those athletes. And so reaching out to them. And then we're currently working on creating a program through Men for Life where men can sign up, women can sign up to and join. And we'll have weekly meetings with mentors, pro-life mentors, people in the masculinity space. And when I talk about masculinity, I'm talking about real masculinity, biblical foundation, not, this self-serving masculinity that exists out in the manosphere. But where we can really get people tuned into, hey, let's normalize talking about this, because that's the first step, right? Getting men to talk about it.
And I think, as you alluded to earlier, Sean, your work really gets to the heart of the issue, which is sometimes all a woman, an expectant woman who's considering abortion, needs to hear from her husband, boyfriend is, actually, we can do this. We can look after this baby. He takes the lead there. Sean, I understand that you yourself have prior first-hand experience of the tragedy of abortion. Could you share some of this story with us? Yeah.
So I was 19 years old, and I was away at college, and my girlfriend and I created a baby. She got pregnant, and she came and told me that she was pregnant, and I actually did start thinking, hey, how is this going to affect us? I don't think that the messaging that I was using was right as to her concerns, because she was concerned about her, right? And we know that now through research. That's the number one concern of mom, and it should be. But my concern was baby. And so, I was thinking how is this going to affect us and all these things. And she let me know that she was going to have an abortion. And I fought against the abortion. My dad actually came to town and talked to her mom and offered to adopt the baby. And so we did really everything we could to save the child, and we lost. And the impact that had, despite being told that, it didn't matter what I thought or what I felt, and despite the school, even when the school waived the young lady's classes because she was struggling after the abortion and they didn't want it to affect her grades. And then I went and talked to those same people. They were very clear that this didn't affect me. I was not somebody who this affected. And so that was what I was left with, but it did affect me. And so what ended up happening is I ended up failing out of college. I moved home. I failed out of another college 2 more times. And by 2005, so 8 years after the abortion, I was at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, homeless, unemployed, and overdosing in a hotel room, waiting for the police to come and arrest me for stealing from my previous employer. And during that entire 7-year period, it never occurred to me that, hey, this feeling that I'm trying to cover up with all these drugs or whatever I was doing is because of the loss of my child, until I got into treatment. And so I got into treatment, and the counselor, for the first time stopped me as I was going through my life history and said, hey, we should talk about this. This does affect you, and you do have a right to mourn, and you do have a right to grieve. And this, clearly, looking at it objectively, going in an upward trajectory in life, the abortion happened and I crashed. Looking at it now, it's easy to see, but in the middle of it, after being told that it didn't affect me and I didn't have a right to feel anything about it, I believed that. And I think that's what many men believe.
Believe the lie. Yeah.
Right.
Now, Sean, it's been said that we're living in the so-called kind of weak men create hard times era.
Yeah.
Do you see a relationship between what are really skyrocketing abortion rates that we're seeing on both sides of the Atlantic, and the general weakness of the modern man?
Yeah, 100%. So I think that the current state of abortion is the product of failed masculinity. And that's a challenging thought to a lot of people. But if we look back and we think about this, who benefits from abortions? There are abusive men. I can sit here and I can say, hey, men have a right to speak out for their children, right? And I can have that argument, but I also have to be cognizant of the fact that there are bad men. There are men who use abortion. I've got 4 headlines just in the last year of men in Texas, Illinois, who poisoned their girlfriends with the abortion pill in order to, and that's the new landscape of this, right? So, so, to answer your question, there's nothing weaker that a man can do than submit to the idea that, hey, I'm okay with you killing my child. Like, I'm okay with you killing my baby.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to step on your toes in this decision.
It's a complete inversion of his role as protector.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as a leader, and I mean, to protect, to provide, to lead and serve, like, he's not providing, the care that she needs, like the emotional support. He's not protecting her or the baby. I mean, there's so much data now. There's dozen studies at least in meta-analyses showing the direct correlation of negative mental health impact to women who have had an abortion, including 2 to 6 times higher rate of committing suicide, not attempting, committing, going through with it. And so, if we know this and we don't protect women from the lies of the abortion industry, then we are failing in our masculinity. If we support this idea, you have to stand for something as a man, right? And when it comes to this, you have 2 choices. You can say, well, I stand for the woman's right to choose. Well, it's a choice between life and abortion, right? And abortion kills a baby every time. So it's a choice between life or death. So what you're saying is, I stand for life or I stand for death. And I think that we've gotten as a society to a point where men are scared to be men, because it's not just in the abortion argument. Like men have been beaten down, and told that we're bad and put in a corner and put in a box and said, you can't talk about this. You're evil. And I get this all the time on social media. And so there's this fear, and we shouldn't be sitting in fear, right? We should be leading in righteousness. And leading in truth, really. And so I think, yes, there's a very strong correlation to the weakness of modern man and the prevalence, the prevalence for abortion.
Sean, you mentioned earlier some of the stories of men slipping their partners an abortion pill. Be assured that we've covered some of those stories, so they are getting the recognition that they deserve. And we have similar tragic stories here, very geographically close to home. Now, Sean, we recently saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a man who never missed an opportunity to speak out for the unborn child. In a real sense, he embodied the values of your organization in that he was evidently a strong father figure. He recognized the importance of the traditional family unit, and he gave his voice for the voiceless unborn. Now, how do we persuade more men to speak out against abortion and for the unborn child?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to your last question. I think it's a call to masculinity. Even in pro-life circles, that if we look at the overriding or the demographics, it's 90% women, who are active in the pro-life movement. And something that just came to me, and let's call it God giving me a message that resonates with men, resonates with women too. But I think this really gets to the heart of a man is, and I'm talking about men who identify as pro-life. If we can agree that abortion is a spiritual war, and I think most people who are pro-life will say abortion is a spiritual war. If we can agree that abortion is a spiritual war, and if we can acknowledge that 90% of the people fighting in this war are women, then have we consigned ourselves as men to sit back and write checks to fund a war that we send our women off to fight? And when we hear that, right, like, I don't want to be that man. Like, but then the question becomes, what can I do? And that's where Men for Life is really working to formulate strong answers to that on what can we do. The biggest thing we can do is mentor the next generation of young men to make the better decisions, right? To lead those young women and to save the babies on the front end. Like, that really is the first thing we can do. Because if we can recognize, and this is another call to action, if we can recognize as men and a lot of times men in our generation, which I just classify as everyone from 25 and up, right?
Yeah.
Can look at the younger generation of men and say, man, like, these guys suck.
Yeah.
Like, they are weak.
And I think
they don't know what it means to be a man.
You're dead right. And I've seen it firsthand, Sean. And I think it's done with good intentions. So pro-life men who are maybe responding to what the culture wants of them, we think, well, the culture might respond better if we push pro-life women to the fore, because they'll be more receptive to their message. But I think if anything, pro-life women are maybe looking back and saying, actually, we're emboldened by your help. Directing this to pro-life men, we need your help as well, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Like, they want to know where we are. Like, where are we? You know, and hey, that message from these strong pro-life women, you know, and I'll be clear, you know, that we don't, the pro-life women don't need strong men to step in because they're weak, right? It's because strong women deserve strong men fighting alongside of them. But those women, just in the past 6 months I've seen, are also on fire about calling men to action. You know, the CEOs of the Vitae Foundation, of Students for Life, of Sidewalk Advocates for Life, all women, right? And they've all been fighting this fight, and they have been very clear in their messaging that, hey, it's time for men to step up.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Now, Sean, do you think that pro-life organizations spend too much time trying to influence politicians and maybe too little time at least trying to change the culture, what we've been talking about?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think that, the argument from the other side many times is, if you make this illegal, people will still do it. They'll just do it illegally, right? And that's true. I believe that. I think that it will certainly lessen the number of abortions, because not everyone wants to be a criminal. However, yes, people will still do it. Laws by themselves will not end abortion. You know, if people's hearts don't change to the understanding that ending a human life is not okay, you know, and that all human life has value, then until we get our culture to that point, then people will keep having abortions. So certainly, like, to the people who are working to change the laws, keep working, right? That's important. But you're absolutely right. We have to change the culture. Changing the culture is paramount. Like, that is the only thing that's going to matter, because otherwise, you know, we could also have this whole, like, back and forth, you know, depending on who's in power. Law goes this way, law goes this way, law goes this way, just back and forth forever.
That's always a risk.
But if we change the culture, then we can end abortion.
Yeah. Now, Sean, you've mentioned it already, the spiritual dimension of the pro-life battle. How do we best equip ourselves in this spiritual battle? Yeah.
So I actually gave a talk on this on Thursday. It was to a group in Dallas of over 300. It was a really interesting group. It's 300 like executive directors and staff of pregnancy centers, and just talking about the spiritual war. So if I may just reference the Bible, you know, if we look at, you know, this is a spiritual war, right? Like, from Ephesians 12, this is not a war of flesh and blood. This is a war against principalities, powers, and leaders and rulers of darkness in the world. And then it says, to put on the full armor of God, right? And what's the first thing it says to put on? It says to put on the belt of truth, right? The first and most important thing that we need in this fight, and this goes to all of your questions that you've asked, you know, it goes to everything that Charlie Kirk stood for, right? It goes to the heart of the spiritual war. You know, Satan is the father of lies, John 8:44, and it goes to, you know, and then the only thing we can stand on is truth, right? So I think that standing in truth is the most important thing. You have to have integrity, and you have to have confidence, you know, and you have to believe that if you're standing in the truth of God, that you're doing the right thing. And if you're getting attacked by the lies, by the devil, by the other side, then you're doing the right thing.
That's confirmation that you are.
100%.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
100%, and so I think that is the biggest thing. And where can we find the truth? Well, we can find the truth in the Bible, and the Bible certainly says that that God knew us before He formed us in the womb. Right? We were created before that spark. And when I say that spark, I'm talking about the biological spark that we've seen on the microscope that happens when a sperm meets an egg. Right? There is a literal spark that happens, and so from that point, over 95% of biologists from 5,000 biologists from over 1,000 institutions agree that life begins at conception, that human life begins at conception. This is a human life. That is the truth. We should not kill human life. That is a truth. Abortion kills human life. That is a truth. Abortion is wrong. Like unless you agree that we should kill humans, you can't agree to abortion.
And we may
completely disregarding the truth.
Yeah, we maybe overcomplicate it sometimes, but you've just illustrated perfectly. It really is quite simple at the end of the day, the pro-life truths. Now, finally, Sean, and probably the most loaded question and possibly the hardest to answer, and not something that you or your organization are solely responsible for. We are as well. But practically speaking, how then can men help end abortion?
Yeah. So, the first call to action that I have for men is in relation to the fatherhood programs. And when I say, and I'm sorry I don't have the numbers for the UK, but in America there's 3,000 pregnancy centers. So if we can reach, like I said, we can reach 150,000 men a year. But the pregnancy centers know that the women who are running those pregnancy centers, by and large, it's women, fully staffed women, aren't the right ones to teach men how to be men. Like, they get it, right? And they've been doing it because no men have been stepping into it. But they want the men. So I was asked 3 questions. I went to a conference, my very first pro-life conference, because I was practicing law and for 10 years, and I just took this job in August of last year. And so I went to my first conference in the spring, and I had 104 different pregnancy centers come up and ask the exact same 3 questions. The first one was, do you have a fatherhood program? Which is why we're so intent on finishing this fatherhood program for the pregnancy centers. The second was, once we get the young man in, how do we get him to come back? And so that's why our fatherhood program is based upon something that young man is going to want, right? Because we want him to want to come back. The third, and it goes to the heart of this question, was how do we get men in the community to facilitate this program? And so I think that is the first and easiest, like, low-hanging fruit way for men to get involved, because all of us as men are qualified to mentor the next generation. Whether we've made mistakes in our lives, I mean, nobody's made more mistakes than I have. Whether we've made mistakes in our lives, whether we've, we feel like we have nothing to offer, like they just want an older man to say, I hear you, because nobody's ever done that. To say, you can do this, because nobody's ever done that. They're learning what it means to be a man by watching YouTube, by watching Instagram, by watching TikTok, and from their friends who also don't know how to be a man, right? And so we have a role to fill, and we're called by God as part of our masculine role to raise up the next generation of young men. So that's the first step. Think about 3,000 pregnancy centers. If each one had 10 men, there's 30,000 men right there. Once we fill that, I'll come up with something else. But let's get 30,000 men filling the pregnancy centers. The next thing is on the sidewalk. With the sidewalk advocates, they, by and large, also are women. Men can serve a couple different roles on the sidewalks. The first is to just add a level of security, and safety for the people that are there. Not that they're going to go out and they're going to start fights.
No,
because
but
that's
just the knowledge that they're there. Yeah.
Just makes everybody feel more secure, tones things down a little.
Sure.
But then when those men come to the abortion clinic, because unlike the pregnancy centers who are inviting the men into the pregnancy center, the abortion clinics are not allowing the men into the abortion clinic. So they're sitting on the sidewalk. And many times the stories from the men on the sidewalk are, well, I went and talked to him and I said, hey, how do you feel about this? And he said, well, I want the baby, but it's her body, her choice. And so the sidewalk advocates can And women may not feel comfortable going up and talking to these men, but if men are on the sidewalk, they can talk to them and say, hey, you have a chance. You still have a chance to say something. You still have a chance, and there's stories where where these young men did go in and say something, and both of them came out beaming because neither one of them wanted to do this. But she said, what do you want to do? And he said, it's your body, your choice. And she heard the entire burden of this decision is on you. So you have to figure this out.
Yeah.
And I'm not committing to being there for you, And so just men on the sidewalk is another big thing.
And it's fantastic that you have the opportunity to do that in America, because of course, as of about 2 years ago now, with buffer zones in this country, we now literally can't be within 200 meters, 150 meters, I believe it is, down in England, Wales. We can't be in the vicinity of an abortion clinic. So any pavement counselling, we have to do 200 meters away. So we're both up against it on both sides of the Atlantic, very much. Sean, thank you for speaking to us today, and thank you for the work that your organisation does, both in holding men to account, but also in encouraging and supporting men as well.
Yes, thank you, William. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Sean. God bless.
All right, bye.
Thank you for watching SPUC TV. If you're enjoying our content, please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications.
Ireland's 3-day waiting period before an abortion has again become the focus of political debate. Yet the evidence shows it remains one of the most effective safeguards in the country's abortion law. Introduced as part of the 2018 legislation following the repeal of the Eighth Amendment, the waiting period requires women to pause for at least 72 hours between an initial consultation and the abortion procedure. Far from being a bureaucratic obstacle, the measure was designed as a compassionate space for reflection before an irreversible decision. Recent figures from Ireland's Department of Health demonstrate just how vital that safeguard is. In 2022 alone, more than 2,600 women who attended an initial consultation did not return to complete an abortion. Between 2019 and 2022, the total exceeds 6,500 lives that may well have been spared because of the crucial pause. These numbers reveal that the waiting period is not a token gesture, but a real life-saving protection for both mother and child. Despite this, pressure is mounting from some quarters to abolish the waiting period. Social Democrats leader Holly Cairns has questioned the government about its future, while Health Minister Jennifer Carroll McNeill has confirmed that a review of the 2018 Act has been completed. Since legislation, the Irish government has steadily expanded abortion access, introducing the procedure in all maternity hospitals, widening community provision and continuing the remote consultations first permitted during the pandemic. Buffer zones are also being implemented around abortion providers. These measures make the waiting period more important than ever. With abortion now available more easily and in more places, the 3-day reflection time is one of the few remaining checks in the system, a humane provision ensuring women have the opportunity to think carefully about their choice and receive additional support if they wish. More than 100 Irish doctors, including respected obstetrician Dr. Trevor Hayes, have publicly supported retaining the waiting periods. They note that in medicine, reflection is standard before many serious interventions. And ending a pregnancy should be no different. The evidence is clear. Ireland's reflection period has saved thousands of lives. To remove it would serve no purpose other than to advance abortion access for its own sake. In a country that once prided itself on protecting both mother and child, this safeguard deserves to stay. Two prominent members of the House of Lords, Baroness Monckton and Baroness Stroud, have tabled crucial amendments to the government's Crime and Policing Bill, aiming to reverse one of the most extreme changes to Britain's abortion law in decades. Their proposals would remove Clause 191, which would legalise self-performed abortions for any reason, even up to the point of birth. and restore mandatory in-person medical consultations before abortion pills are prescribed for home use. Clause 191 was inserted by Welsh Labour MP Tonia Antonazzi in June, after less than an hour of debate in the House of Commons. The clause would remove legal penalties for women performing abortions on themselves at any stage of pregnancy, effectively permitting abortion on demand until birth. Critics warn this would mark the most sweeping deregulation of abortion since 1967 and could expose vulnerable women and unborn children to immense danger. Baroness Monckton's amendment seeks to strike the clause from the bill entirely, insisting that such a profound shift in moral and medical law should never be rushed through without scrutiny, public consultation, or parliamentary accountability. She and others argue that Parliament must not normalise late-term abortion or turn a blind eye to the human costs behind so-called choice. Meanwhile, Baroness Stroud is leading a separate effort to reinstate in-person consultations before abortion pills are prescribed. The current pills by post system introduced during the pandemic allows abortion drugs to be sent to women following only a remote consultation, a practice that already has led to tragedy. In 2023, Carla Foster took abortion pills at 30 weeks pregnant, killing her baby Lily, after lying about her gestational age. Another case saw Stuart Warby convicted for secretly administering abortion pills to his partner. Medical data shows that late-term abortions are exponentially more dangerous, and the absence of medical supervision increases the risks of serious complications. Reports from emergency services show growing numbers of women needing hospital treatment after taking abortion pills at home. Pro-life advocates say the Monckton and Stroud amendments are essential steps toward protecting women, upholding medical ethics, and recognising the humanity of unborn children. As the House of Lords prepares to debate the proposals, many will be watching closely, hoping that Parliament will choose compassion, caution, and the protection of life over ideological zeal. Uruguay has become the first country in Latin America to legalise euthanasia, marking a deeply troubling milestone in the region's steady moral decline. The country's Senate passed the so-called Dignified Death Bill on Wednesday, with 20 of the 31 legislators present voting in favour of allowing doctors to intentionally end the lives of their patients. The new law permits mentally competent adults suffering from terminal and irreversible diseases to request euthanasia in writing. Their deaths will be carried out by healthcare professionals who are now legally empowered to take a life under the guise of compassion. Supporters claim this offers a peaceful and respectful death, but critics argue it represents the formal acceptance of killing as a form of care. The vote followed a 10-hour debate in Senate. While the discussion was largely restrained, some onlookers cried out, "Murderers," as the bill passed, a visceral reaction reflecting the anguish felt by many Uruguayans. The Catholic Church led opposition to the measure, warning that it sends a dangerous message that some lives are no longer worth living. Archbishop Daniel Sturla of Montevideo condemned the law, saying it contributes to thinking that some lives are disposable, and reaffirmed the Church's belief that every human life has inherent dignity, even amid suffering. Public opinion polls suggest 62% of Uruguayans supported euthanasia, reflecting how cultural attitudes have shifted in a country long known for its social liberalism. Uruguay previously legalised abortion, same-sex marriage, and marijuana, placing it among the most secular nations in Latin America. Pro-life advocates, however, warn that euthanasia laws inevitably expand far beyond their initial limits. What begins as an option for the terminally ill soon becomes a supposed right for anyone who feels their life lacks purpose. In countries like the Netherlands and Canada, such laws have led to the deaths of people with depression, disability, and even poverty, outcomes once dismissed as unthinkable. By legalising euthanasia, Uruguay has crossed a tragic line, transforming the role of doctors from healers into agents of death. True dignity, Opponents insist is found not in ending life, but in cherishing and accompanying those who suffer with compassion and care. Uruguay's decision risks setting a precedent across Latin America that could see its most vulnerable citizens abandoned when they need protection the most. Campaigners have voiced alarm over the membership of a new House of Lords committee set up to examine the government's assisted dying proposals after it emerged that not a single disabled person has been appointed to serve on it. The 13-member committee will scrutinise the safeguards and procedures in the Terminally Ill Adults End-of-Life Bill, which would legalise assisted suicide in the UK for the first time. It is chaired by Lord Hope, but does not include any disabled peers. The absence of disabled peers has sparked strong criticism from disability rights groups and opponents of the bill, who argue that most affected by assisted dying laws are being sidelined from the decision-making process. Phil Friend of Not Dead Yet UK, a grassroots campaign group, described the situation as deeply worrying, warning that without lived experience on the committee, there is a real risk of overlooking the subtle pressures and coercion vulnerable people face. Disabled people must be included in shaping any discussion of law that could so profoundly affect our lives, he said. The concerns are heightened by the fact that about 2/3 of peers who spoke during the bill's second reading last month voiced opposition to the proposals in their current form. Many warned that legalising assisted dying would fundamentally alter the way society views vulnerable people, particularly the elderly and disabled, and could increase the pressure on those who already feel like a burden to their families or the state. Critics say the lack of disabled representation on the committee sends a troubling signal that such voices are considered less relevant despite being central to the ethical debate. The controversy comes as a prominent opponent of the bill in the House of Lords. Lord Milan criticised deceitful language in the bill. Speaking exclusively to SPUCTV, the Conservative peer criticised language in the bill designed to conceal its real purpose.
Well, we have to keep talking and using straightforward, plain language. The approved substance in the bill is poison, and we should carry on calling it poison. And again, it is definitely assisted suicide that we're talking about, especially as it confuses people into thinking it's something else. Assisted death, we know, makes a lot of people who aren't fully familiar with the bill think that we're talking about palliative care when they say they support assisted death. So assisted suicide helps make it much clearer, I think. It's more honest. I think we just need to be honest about the language and recognise that their use of language is designed largely to deceive and confuse. And as I say, it's motivated as much by shame as anything else.
Reform UK has announced that Professor James Orr, a Cambridge theologian known for his strong pro-life stance, has joined the party as a senior advisor to Nigel Farage. While critics have accused Reform of importing MAGA politics from the United States, pro-life campaigners have welcomed the appointment as a rare sign of moral clarity in British public life. Professor Orr, who teaches the history of religion at Cambridge University and heads the Centre for a Better Britain, has advised US figures including Vice President J.D. Vance. Reform insiders describe him as a brilliant academic, theologian and thinker, who will play a pivotal role in shaping the future of this country. Orr's arrival follows the defection of MP Danny Kruger from the Conservatives to Reform, another committed pro-life advocate, and seems to signal a growing intellectual confidence within the party to defend traditional moral values. Both men visited J.D. Vance over the summer, underlying a transatlantic link between social conservatives seeking to restore respect for faith, family and life. The reaction from other parties was hostile. Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party denounced the appointment, citing Orr's opposition to abortion, even in cases of rape. Labour branded his views extreme, while Lib Dem Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper claimed Farage was turning Reform into a British franchise of Donald Trump's MAGA movement. However, pro-life observers noted that opposing the killing of unborn children in every circumstance is not extremism, but a consistency, a recognition that every human life, regardless of how it was conceived, has inherent worth. Reform has denied that the party is adopting an anti-abortion platform, describing Orr's appointment as an effort to bring in elite talent. Yet for many, his involvement represents a long overdue challenge to the political consensus that treats abortion as untouchable. If Professor Orr's influence helps reopen a national conversation about the sanctity of life, his presence in reform could prove to be one of the most consequential appointments in recent British politics. I'm Catherine Mokler, and that was SPUC TV News, bringing to light what others hide.
As the debate over the assisted dying bill continues, while it makes its way through Westminster, new evidence is emerging that deepens fears over how the proposed law could reshape end-of-life care in the UK and the moral landscape of medicine itself. We've already reported on the core arguments surrounding the terminally ill adults end-of-life bill and on the growing push from campaigners who continue to claim, in the face of all the evidence, that it offers choice and compassion to those suffering from terminal illness. But fresh concerns from health professionals, legal experts, and faith-based care providers are raising urgent questions about the long-term consequences of the legislation, not just for the dying, who, according to the government's own impact assessment, cost a lot to look after and whose costs could be saved by this bill, but it could also have very serious consequences for those who dedicate their lives to caring for them. At the centre of this renewed debate is the question of conscience and whether the bill truly protects it or destroys it. While the legislation states that no doctor or nurse will be forced to prescribe or administer a lethal dose, critics say the reality is far less reassuring. Under the bill's current wording, healthcare professionals who object to assisted dying would still be required to refer patients to another provider at a stroke, destroying the concept of conscientious objection and making healthcare professionals complicit in the killing of their patients, whether they agree or not. I'm Peter Kearney, and this is Viewpoint. For thousands of doctors and nurses, the assisted dying bill profoundly threatens their right to freedom of conscience and potentially makes them complicit in the killing of their own patients. Being compelled to refer a patient to another provider is absolutely not a neutral act. It's the first deliberate step in a process that ends with the taking of life. New testimony submitted to Parliament describes that obligation as a moral trap, with one consultant in palliative care medicine telling peers that even referring a patient for an assisted death would make them, quote, a participant in the act, not a bystander. That distinction between direct action and indirect facilitation has become one of the bill's most contentious fault lines. And growing evidence shows that the impact could go far beyond individual conscience. Hospices across the country are warning of an existential crisis if the bill passes without a full institution-level opt-out. Many charitable hospices are founded on principles that reject any act intended to hasten death. Without explicit legal protection, they fear being forced either to allow assisted dying on their premises or to face the financial and reputational fallout of refusing to comply. A statement from several hospice leaders warns that public trust and, crucially, donor funding could collapse if their organisations are perceived as complicit in assisted dying. Hospice UK has echoed those concerns, saying that without clarity, the bill could fracture the hospice movement and divert already limited resources away from palliative care. The Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales has also weighed in, warning that a so-called right to die for some could quickly become an expectation for institutions to facilitate it. They argue, correctly, that care homes and hospices could be compelled to permit the process as a condition of state funding, forcing them into what they call a profound moral contradiction. New data from the Association of Palliative Medicine is also sounding alarm bells. A recent survey found that 95% of palliative care doctors would refuse to prescribe lethal medication. More troubling still, 40% said they would consider leaving their posts altogether if the law compels them to participate, even indirectly. The Catholic Medical Association calls this a workforce crisis in waiting. And they warn that the legalisation of assisted dying, combined with a weak conscience clause, could deprive society of the very specialists who provide high-quality palliative care, leaving terminally ill patients with fewer choices, not more. And it's not just moral convictions that are at stake. Legal scholars have warned that the bill's referral requirement could breach Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which protects freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. They say compelling a doctor to refer a patient for a procedure they fundamentally oppose would be a direct interference with that right. Those warnings are not theoretical. The conscience clause in the Abortion Act of 1967 is frequently cited as a failed precedent. Doctors who have tried to rely on it have faced discrimination, career stagnation, and expensive legal challenges. Opponents of the assisted dying bill argue it risks creating the same culture of pressure and punishment for those who object. And as peers in the House of Lords look for international guidance, the evidence from abroad continues to paint a very worrying picture. In Canada, where assisted dying has been legal since 2016, the scope has already expanded, first to those with disabilities and soon to those with mental illness alone. In the Netherlands, once limited to terminal conditions, the law now includes cases of chronic suffering and even completed life, where elderly people seek death simply because they feel they've lived long enough. Or perhaps they've come under extreme pressure to end their lives from relatives keen to get their hands on an inheritance. We'd never know, as they can now be given death on demand. In both countries, initial conscience protections have completely eroded over time. Doctors who refuse to refer patients now face professional penalties, and some have left their specialities altogether. Cardinal Vincent Nichols, President of the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales, has urged lawmakers to pay close attention to those international lessons. He's warned that once the line between healing and hastening death is crossed, it becomes almost impossible to redraw. The evidence, he said, is consistent across every nation that has taken this path. What begins as an exception soon becomes the expectation. He is, of course, correct. Beyond the moral debate, critics say the bill poses serious practical risks for the UK health system. Hospices and palliative care services already struggle with staffing shortages and uneven funding. If a significant portion of the workforce resigns or relocates because of conscience conflicts, that shortfall could deepen dramatically. There are also fears of a two-tier end-of-life system emerging. One where patients seeking assisted dying receive state support, while those who prefer traditional palliative care face longer waits and fewer resources. Supporters of the bill argue that these concerns are exaggerated and that assisted dying can coexist with strong palliative care. But opponents counter that the evidence from abroad tells a very different story, one where funding, training, and cultural emphasis quickly shift away from caring for life towards ending it. In the midst of this, some peers are now calling for amendments to strengthen protections. These would include a clear statutory right for both individuals and institutions to refuse participation in any form, from assessment to referral to the act itself. Others have proposed an opt-in system where only doctors who choose to participate in assisted dying would be registered and authorised to do so. Opponents of the legislation say such safeguards are essential to prevent what they call a crisis of conscience in UK medicine. Without them, they warn, the bill could undermine not just professional ethics, but the very foundation of palliative care, a field built on the belief that compassion means walking with patients through dying, not hastening death itself. For now, the assisted dying bill continues its passage through the Lords, with further scrutiny expected. But the growing weight of testimony from doctors, lawyers, hospices, and religious leaders is making one thing increasingly clear. The questions raised by this bill go far beyond politics. They touch at the heart of what it means to care, to comfort, and to value life, even in its final moments.
That's all we have time for this week. If you enjoyed this show, then please like, comment, and subscribe for weekly videos. And if you have any stories you think we should cover, then please email us at the address on screen or in the description. Thank you for watching.